Ethan's boots crunched softly against the moss-covered ground, the thick, humid air of the forest clinging to him like a second skin. He had ventured far beyond the established perimeter of the human colony, his official mission to scout for valuable resources now feeling more like a distant excuse. What lay before him was unlike any terrain he had encountered in his years of planetary exploration. The trees, if they could be called that, rose like living monoliths, their trunks shimmering with faint bioluminescent patterns, and the air was thick with the sweet, earthy scent of alien vegetation. His hand rested on the hilt of his plasma pistol, more out of habit than necessity. There had been no signs of predators in this part of the forest, but something about the place unsettled him. It wasn't danger that he felt, but presence. As though the land itself was alive and watching him, he brushed away a bead of sweat from his brow, pausing to take in his surroundings. The reports on the Isari, the elusive alien inhabitants of this region, were scant. A reclusive species, they lived deep within the forests, hidden from human eyes for centuries. The human colony had respected the unspoken boundaries, at least until now. With tensions rising back at the colony due to dwindling resources, higher-ups were beginning to look toward Isari territory with increasing interest. That's why Ethan had been sent to investigate, to see if there was anything worth exploiting in these untouched lands. But something about this mission didn't sit right with him. Exploiting wasn't why he'd become an explorer. Ethan had always been driven by curiosity, the desire to uncover the unknown and bridge the gaps between worlds, not to strip them bare for human gain. As he moved deeper into the forest, the dense canopy above began to part, allowing shafts of emerald green light to filter through. He squinted up at the sky, trying to catch a glimpse of the strange phenomena, but that's when he felt it eyes on him. Not the same distant feeling of being watched by the forest itself, but something tangible, someone close. Ethan's fingers tightened around the grip of his pistol. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice barely echoing in the thick air. Silence answered him. His pulse quickened. Slowly he began to move forward, scanning the dense underbrush, but before he could take another step, the forest seemed to shift. Branches rustled, the leaves stirred, and suddenly she appeared. From the shadows of the trees emerged a figure, a woman, but not human. Her skin, the color of polished jade, shimmered in the dappled light. She moved with a quiet, almost predatory grace, her long, flowing hair the same deep green as the leaves around them. Her eyes, bright and piercing, locked onto Ethan's with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. He froze. The stories of the Isari had never done them justice. She was breathtaking, but there was no mistaking the tension in the air between them. Her presence was a clear message: you are not welcome here. "What are you doing here?" Human, her voice was cool, like the breeze that stirred the leaves, yet there was an edge to it, a warning. Ethan swallowed, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm just scouting. I mean, no harm." She raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Scouting? Is that what you call trespassing?" "I didn't realize." "You didn't realize you were in Isari territory." Her tone was sharp, but there was something more in her expression: curiosity, perhaps. It was brief, but Ethan caught it. "I know where I am," Ethan said carefully. "But I'm not here to invade your land or exploit it. I'm here to learn." At this, the woman's eyes narrowed. She took a step closer, her movements fluid, each step making the air around them seem to vibrate with energy. Ethan stood his ground, though his heart raced. "And why should I believe you?" she asked. "Humans have a long history of taking what isn't theirs." Ethan met her gaze, trying to convey sincerity through his words. "I'm not like that. I came to explore, to understand. If your people don't want me here, I'll leave. But I'd like to learn more about you, if you'd allow it." She studied him for a moment longer, as if weighing his soul in her mind. Ethan couldn't tell if he had convinced her, but then, unexpectedly, she lowered her guard. Not by much, but enough for the tension in the air to ease just a little. "My name is Zyara," she said, crossing her arms. "I am the daughter of the Isari leader, and it's my duty to protect this land. If you are lying, human, you will regret it." "Ethan," he said, offering his name in return. "And I'm not lying." Zyara glanced around, her gaze sweeping over the forest, as if searching for any sign of danger. Then, with a small nod, she turned on her heel, walking back into the trees. Ethan hesitated, unsure if he was meant to follow, but when she looked over her shoulder, he understood. "Come," she said. "If you truly wish to learn, you'll need to see the heart of our land. But I warn you, one wrong move, and you won't leave here alive." Ethan nodded, his nerves buzzing with anticipation. As he followed Zyara into the deeper parts of the forest, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter would change everything. The stories of the Asari were about to come alive in ways he had never imagined. And at the center of it all was Zyara, the mysterious, green-skinned woman, whose very presence seemed to hum with untapped power. The deeper they ventured, the more Ethan began to understand that the Asari were not simply protecting their land, they were intertwined with it, bound to its life force in ways that defied human comprehension. The trees, the air, the ground itself seemed to pulse with energy, responding to Zyara's movements as if she was a part of them. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt truly small, a visitor in a world that was far more ancient and powerful than his own, and as he followed Zyara through the living forest, he couldn't help but wonder what secrets lay hidden in this strange, untouched land. And how would his people react if they discovered the true power of the Asari? As night began to fall, and the glowing trees lit the path ahead, Ethan knew one thing for sure: this encounter was just the beginning. The glowing embers of the fire flickered as night fell, casting elongated shadows across the Asari village. Ethan sat on a carved stone, his eyes scanning the surrounding settlement. He could feel the weight of their stares, dozens of Asari villagers watching him from the treetops, their bright green eyes glowing in the dark. The village itself was a marvel, nestled high among the towering trees, interconnected by bridges made of woven vines and roots that seemed to pulse with life. It was as if the very forest had risen to cradle the Asari, sheltering them from the world beyond. Zyara stood nearby, her back turned to him as she spoke in low tones to an elder Asari male. Ethan caught fragments of their conversation in the melodic, whispered language of the Asari people. He didn't need to understand the words to know what they were discussing him. Ever since Zyara had led him into the village, the tension had been palpable. He was an outsider, a human. And though Zyara had vouched for him, there was a clear line drawn between him and the Asari. The night air was thick with a sweet, earthy scent, the same aroma that had greeted him when he first entered the forest. But now it seemed heavier, more oppressive. Ethan could feel the scrutiny, the suspicion in the air. He shifted uncomfortably, wondering if agreeing to follow Zyara into the heart of her people had been a mistake. Eventually, Zyara finished her conversation with the elder and approached him. Her expression was guarded, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. "They don't trust you," she said bluntly, sitting beside him on a low stone bench. Her presence was both calming and unsettling. There was a grace to her movements, a quiet strength that Ethan found captivating and unnerving in equal measure. "I can't say I blame them," Ethan replied. "I didn't exactly arrive with an invitation." Zyara nodded, glancing out at the village. "My people have kept themselves hidden from outsiders for generations. We value our connection to the land, to the energy that flows through everything here. Humans, you're kind, you see the world in a different way, you take, you extract, you consume." Ethan winced at the harshness of her words, but he couldn't deny the truth in them. The history of human expansion was rife with exploitation, even here on this planet. The colony's very existence was proof of that. "I'm not here to take anything from you," he said softly, hoping she could sense his sincerity. "I'm here to learn, to understand." Zyara's eyes narrowed, her gaze searching his face for any sign of deception. "It's easy to say that now, but what happens when your people learn of us? When they see what we have? The energy that flows through the forest, through us, is a power unlike anything your people possess. They will want it." Ethan's brow furrowed. He had seen glimpses of this energy. She spoke of how the trees seemed to respond to her presence, how the very air vibrated with a life force beyond his comprehension. But he had no idea of its true potential. "What is it exactly?" he asked, curiosity overcoming his hesitation. "This energy you're connected to." Zyara hesitated for a moment, as if weighing whether to trust him with the answer. Then, with a soft sigh, she began to explain. "The Asari are born with a deep connection to the life force of our world," she said, her voice low and almost reverent. "We don't just live in the forest, we are part of it. The energy that flows through the trees, the plants, the earth, it flows through us as well. It gives us the ability to heal, to protect, to shape the world around us. But it's not something we can take for granted. It must be nurtured, respected. If we disrupt the balance, we lose everything." Ethan listened intently, captivated by her words. He had never encountered anything like this before. The idea that an entire species could be so in tune with their environment that they could wield such power without exploiting it was foreign to him. In the human world, power was something to be harnessed, controlled, but the Asari saw it differently. They saw it as something to be in harmony with. "That's incredible," Ethan said, genuine awe in his voice. "But why hide it? Why not share this knowledge with others? If humans understood what you do, maybe we could learn to live more sustainably." Zayara laughed, a soft, bitter sound. "Do you really believe that? Do you think your people would embrace harmony over control? Look at your own colony. You're already cutting down the forests, mining the land, expanding. You say you want to understand, but your leaders, they only want power." Ethan couldn't argue with her. He had seen firsthand the growing greed of the colony's administration. Every time a new resource was discovered, it was only a matter of time before it was exploited. But still, he couldn't shake the feeling that things could be different. If only the right people understood. "I'm not like them," he said quietly. "I want to protect this place. I want to protect you." Zayara's eyes flicked to his, and for a moment they softened, but then she quickly looked away, her expression hardening once more. "You say that now," she murmured, "but words are easy. It's actions that matter." Before Ethan could respond, the elder from earlier approached them, his movements slow but deliberate. His long, silvery hair flowed behind him like a cascade of moonlight, and his eyes glowing with the same emerald hue as the others were fixed on Ethan. "We have decided," the elder said, his voice deep and resonant. "You may stay with us for now. But know this, you are still an outsider. One wrong move, and you will be cast out or worse." Ethan stood, bowing his head slightly in gratitude. "Thank you. I won't betray your trust." The elder's gaze lingered on him for a moment before he turned to Zayara. "Watch him closely, child. It is your duty to ensure he does not bring harm to our people." Zayara nodded solemnly, though Ethan couldn't help but notice a flicker of something else in her eyes, something that resembled doubt. As the elder left, Zayara turned back to Ethan. "Come," she said. "I will show you more of our ways. But remember, you are a guest here. Respect our customs, and perhaps you will begin to understand." Ethan followed her, his mind racing with questions and emotions. He knew this was only the beginning of his journey into the heart of the Asari culture, and the more he learned, the more complicated his feelings toward them and toward Zayara became. The cultural divide between them was vast, but there was something drawing them together, something deeper than either of them could fully comprehend. As they walked deeper into the village, Ethan couldn't help but wonder, could a human and an Asari truly find common ground, or were their worlds simply too different, too divided by history and nature? Only time would tell. The air was thick with tension as the soft glow of dawn began to seep through the canopy, casting the Asari village in a gentle, golden light. Ethan's sleep had been restless, his thoughts tangled in the complex web of emotions and questions Zayara had stirred within him. The more time he spent among her people, the more he saw how vastly different their ways were from anything he'd known, and yet the more he was drawn to it and to her. But today was different. Today the village hummed with an undercurrent of anticipation. It wasn't just his presence that caused it, there was something else, something deeper, that had the Asari on edge. He could feel it in the way the villagers moved, in the way their eyes lingered on him, on Zayara, with both curiosity and unease. He found Zayara near the edge of the village, standing by the great tree that anchored their settlement. Its roots, thick and pulsing with life, stretched deep into the forest, and its branches seemed to touch the sky. The tree was the heart of their village, and Ethan suspected, the heart of their connection to the energy that flowed through the land. She was quiet, her emerald skin glistening in the early morning light, her posture tense as she gazed up at the tree. Ethan approached cautiously, sensing the weight of her thoughts. "Zayara," he called softly, his voice careful not to disturb the fragile peace of the moment. She turned slowly, her green eyes meeting his with a mix of determination and apprehension. "Today is an important day for my people," she said, her voice steady but distant. "It is the day of renewal." "Renewal?" Ethan asked, stepping closer. "What does that mean?" Zayara glanced back at the tree, her gaze intense. "It is a day when we reaffirm our bond with the forest, with the energy that sustains us. Every few years, a trial is held, a test of strength and loyalty for those who have come of age. We must prove our connection to the land, prove that we are worthy of the power we wield. Ethan watched her closely, sensing the weight of her words. And you're part of this trial. She nodded, her jaw tightening. As the daughter of the village leader, my trial is different. It is more than just a test of strength. I must demonstrate that I can protect my people, that I am worthy of the role I will one day inherit. He took a step closer, his eyes searching hers. And what does that trial involve? Zayara hesitated, her expression unreadable. I must harness the energy of the forest, control it, shape it, and then I must face the dangers that come with wielding that power. There was something in her voice that unsettled Ethan, a quiet fear she was trying to hide. What kind of dangers, he asked, his concern deepening. She didn't answer right away, her gaze still locked on the great tree. The forest is alive, she finally said. It is ancient, and it remembers. It remembers the times before the Asari. It remembers the times when other creatures roamed these lands, creatures who craved the same power we now guard. The trial is not just a test of our control over the energy, it is a test of our ability to defend it. Ethan's breath caught. You mean, you have to fight? Zayara turned to face him fully now, her expression hard but resigned. Yes. There are forces that would seek to claim the energy for themselves. Creatures born from the darkness of this world, creatures who have long waited for a moment of weakness. During the trial, they will sense the power we invoke, and they will come for it. The weight of her words hit him like a physical blow. He'd known the Asari had enemies, but he hadn't realized just how dangerous this trial would be. And you're going to face them. Alone. Zayara's eyes softened, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her usual stoic demeanor. It is my duty. My people expect me to prove myself. If I fail, it will not only be my honor that is lost, it will be the safety of the village. Ethan's heart raced. The thought of her facing such danger alone gnawed at him. He knew she was strong, capable, but the idea of her fighting against ancient, dark forces without anyone by her side filled him with dread. There must be another way, he said, his voice urgent. You don't have to do this alone. Zayara's gaze hardened again, though he could see the conflict behind her eyes. This is the way of my people, Ethan. I cannot change that. I must prove myself worthy. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently grasp her arm. Then let me help you. I may not be Asari, but I've fought my share of battles. I won't stand by and watch you face this danger alone. For a moment she didn't move, her gaze locked on his hand resting against her arm. Slowly she lifted her eyes to meet his, and in them, Ethan saw a flicker of something more than just determination. He saw fear for her people, for herself, and perhaps for him. This is not your fight, she said softly, though her words lacked the conviction they once held. If you interfere, you will only make things worse. Ethan shook his head. I won't interfere. But I can't just stand back and watch you risk your life. I care about you, Zayara. Her breath caught at his words, and for a moment the mask of duty she wore so well cracked. Her gaze softened, her resolve wavering. I don't know if you understand what you're offering, she whispered, her voice barely audible. If you stand with me, if you become part of this trial, it will change everything. My people will see you not as an outsider, but as someone bound to us. You will never be able to return to the life you knew. Ethan met her gaze, his expression unwavering. I understand, and I'm not turning back. Zayara held his gaze for a long moment before finally she nodded. Very well. If you truly wish to stand by me, then you must follow my lead. The trial begins at sunset. As the day passed, Ethan prepared himself mentally for what was to come. The village buzzed with activity as the Asari prepared for the trial, gathering in small groups to chant and offer prayers to the great tree. Ethan stayed close to Zayara, observing the reverence the Asari held for their traditions, their rituals deeply rooted in the land and the energy that sustained them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the village in a deep, dusky glow, the air seemed to shift. The energy that Ethan had felt pulsing through the forest grew stronger, more palpable. Zayara led him to the center of the village, where the great tree's roots formed a wide open space. The villagers gathered around, their eyes glowing with anticipation as they watched Zayara step forward. Ethan stood beside her, his heart pounding as the elder Asari approached, his voice low and solemn as he began the ritual. "Zyara, daughter of the forest, today you will prove your worth as a protector of our people," the elder intoned. "You will face the darkness, and you will call upon the energy that flows through our land. But beware, for the forces you summon will not be yours to command, they will test you, and they will seek to destroy you if you falter." Zyara nodded, her expression unreadable as she knelt before the great tree. Ethan watched, his throat tight with worry, as she placed her hands on the ground, her fingers sinking into the earth. The air around her shimmered, the energy of the forest gathering at her command. And then, the shadows began to stir. From the depths of the forest, dark shapes emerged, twisting and writhing as they approached the village. Ethan's breath hitched as he saw them, creatures of shadow and smoke, their eyes glowing with a malevolent hunger. The trial had begun. The creatures emerged from the darkness of the forest, twisting forms of shadow and malevolent energy. Their shapes were vaguely humanoid, but their limbs were unnaturally long, their bodies shifting and flickering, as though made of the very essence of night itself. Glowing red eyes stared hungrily at the village, and Ethan could feel the sheer weight of their malevolence pressing against him like a physical force. Beside him, Zyara remained kneeling on the ground, her hands still buried in the earth, her head bowed in deep concentration. The energy around her had intensified, the very air shimmering with power as she called upon the life force of the forest. But it wasn't enough to stop the creatures, not yet. They were coming for her, drawn to the power she was summoning like moths to a flame. Ethan's instinct screamed at him to draw his plasma pistol, to fire at the encroaching horde, but he held himself back. Zyara had warned him that this trial wasn't just about fighting, it was about proving her control over the energy, her ability to harness it without succumbing to its dangers. If he interfered now, he would undermine everything she was trying to achieve. But the creatures were getting closer, their movements slow but deliberate, and Ethan's heart raced as he watched them advance. He could see the fear in the eyes of the gathered Asari, their faith in Zyara's ability to protect them tempered by the very real threat of the shadow beasts. The village, so alive and vibrant just hours before, now seemed fragile and vulnerable in the face of this ancient darkness. "Zyara," Ethan whispered urgently, unable to keep the tension from his voice. "They're getting closer." "I know," she replied, her voice tight but controlled. Her eyes were closed, her face a mask of focus. "I can feel them." "What do we do?" he asked, his hand instinctively brushing the grip of his pistol. "We wait," she said, her voice low. "I need to draw more of the forest's energy. Only then can I face them." Ethan clenched his jaw, every muscle in his body screaming at him to act, to protect her. But he trusted Zyara, trusted her strength and her knowledge of the energy that flowed through this land. If she said they needed to wait, then he would wait no matter how much it tore at him to do so. The creatures continued their slow, deliberate approach, their red eyes fixed on Zyara. Ethan could feel the malevolence radiating from them, the hunger for the energy she was summoning. It was a hunger that could not be sated, a force that would consume everything in its path if given the chance. And then, just as the first of the shadow beasts reached the outer edge of the village, Zyara's eyes snapped open. A wave of power surged outward from her, an invisible force that rippled through the ground and the air, causing the trees to sway and the leaves to tremble. The shadow creatures hesitated, their twisted forms flickering, as if confused by the sudden burst of energy. Zyara rose to her feet slowly, her eyes glowing with the green light of the forest's life force. Ethan watched in awe as she stood tall, her presence commanding, the very air around her crackling with power. The creatures, sensing her strength, hesitated for the first time, their movements uncertain. But they did not retreat. The energy she had summoned was too tempting, too irresistible for them to ignore. Zyara raised her arms, and the ground beneath the creatures began to shift. Vines and roots, thick and pulsating with life, erupted from the earth, wrapping around the shadow creatures' legs, pulling them down. The beasts shrieked, their voices a twisted cacophony of rage and despair as they struggled against the forest's grip. But for every vine they tore through, more emerged, wrapping tighter and tighter, until their movements were almost entirely restricted. Ethan felt a surge of hope. She was doing it. Zyara was winning. But then, without warning, the creatures shifted again, This time their forms grew darker, more solid. Their shadowy limbs became sharp, like jagged shards of obsidian, and with a single powerful swipe, they severed the vines that held them. The creatures roared in unison, their red eyes flaring with renewed fury as they charged toward Zyara. Ethan's hand flew to his pistol, but before he could draw it, Zyara moved. She thrust her arms forward, and a massive burst of energy exploded from her, sending the creatures flying backward. The force of the blast shook the very ground, and Ethan stumbled as the shockwave passed through him. The creatures crashed into the trees, their bodies flickering and writhing as they tried to regain their footing. But Zyara wasn't done. Her eyes blazed with green light, and the ground beneath the shadow creatures began to glow. The earth itself seemed to come alive, pulsing with energy as it shifted and cracked. The creatures let out guttural shrieks, their forms becoming unstable as the forest's life force enveloped them. Ethan watched in awe as the very land responded to Zyara's will. The trees, the roots, the earth, it was all part of her, and she part of it. She wasn't just controlling the energy, she was the energy, and it flowed through her like a river, unstoppable and pure. The creatures writhed and thrashed, their forms breaking apart as the forest's power overwhelmed them. One by one, they disintegrated, their bodies dissolving into shadow and smoke, until there was nothing left but the faint scent of burning ozone in the air. Zyara stood in the center of the village, breathing heavily, her eyes still glowing with the last remnants of the energy she had summoned. The forest around her was silent, the shadow creatures defeated. But the toll on her was visible. Her shoulders were slumped, and her legs trembled as if the weight of the energy she had wielded was too much to bear. Ethan rushed to her side, his heart pounding with relief and worry. "Zyara," he whispered, gently placing a hand on her arm. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her face was pale, her green skin losing some of its vibrant hue. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice was weak. "It took more than I expected, but the village is safe." Ethan looked around at the gathered Asari. They were watching her in awe, their expressions a mix of reverence and disbelief. Zyara had proven herself not just as a leader but as a protector of her people. She had passed the trial, and in doing so, she had secured the safety of the village from the darkness that had threatened them. But as Ethan looked into her eyes, he saw something else, a shadow of doubt, a flicker of fear that hadn't been there before. "What is it?" he asked quietly. "You did it. You defeated them." Zyara shook her head, her eyes darkening. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This was only the beginning." Ethan frowned, confusion washing over him. "What do you mean?" Zyara turned to face him fully, her expression grim. "The creatures we fought today, they were just scouts. There are more, Ethan, many more. And they are coming." Ethan's blood ran cold as her words sank in. The danger hadn't passed, it was only growing. The creatures that had attacked the village were only the first wave, a small taste of the darkness that was lurking in the depths of the forest. And now that they had been defeated, the true threat would reveal itself. The organs. "They're coming for the forest," Zyara said, her voice tight with fear. "And if they succeed, they'll take everything." Ethan felt a chill crawl down his spine. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. And as he looked into Zyara's eyes, he knew that the trial had only just begun. The air was still, unnaturally so, as the village braced for the coming storm. Zyara stood at the edge of the forest, her face lit by the pale glow of the moon filtering through the towering trees. Ethan stood beside her, his heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. The organs, the ancient threat that had long haunted the Asari, were coming for them. The creatures of shadow they had faced the night before were mere scouts, a prelude to the true horror that lurked in the deeper parts of the forest. Now the village had little time to prepare, and Ethan had even less time to come to terms with the fact that this was no longer just Zyara's fight. It was his, too. "How much time do we have?" Ethan asked quietly, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Zyara was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on the distant trees. Her connection to the forest allowed her to feel the pulse of the land, the tremors of danger growing nearer with each passing moment. "Not long," she finally replied, her voice barely a whisper. "The organs are moving faster than I expected. The energy we used to defeat the scouts, it's drawn them here, like moths to a flame." Ethan swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words press against his chest. He had known this was coming, but the reality of it was still difficult to grasp. The organs were unlike any enemy he had faced before. They weren't just creatures, they were forces of nature, ancient and insatiable. They fed on the energy that sustained the Asari, consuming life itself, until nothing remained but hollowed-out husks of worlds. "We can't face them alone," Ethan said, his voice filled with urgency. "We need help. The humans." No, Zyara's voice cut through the night air, sharp and final. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with both sorrow and determination. "The humans will only make it worse. They won't understand what's at stake. They'll try to control the energy, just like the organs. And once they've tasted that power, they'll never let it go." Ethan felt the truth of her words like a blow to the chest. He knew what his people were capable of, the greed that lurked beneath their need for expansion and control. If they knew the full extent of the forest's power, they would stop at nothing to claim it. But that left them with one option: fight. Zyara turned back to the forest, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "We'll have to protect the village ourselves. The forest will help us, but it won't be enough." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. He wasn't about to let Zyara face this threat alone, not after everything they had been through. He had come to this place as a stranger, an outsider, but now he felt bound to the Asari and to Zyara in ways he couldn't fully explain. "I'm with you," he said, his voice steady. "Whatever happens." Zyara glanced at him, her expression softening for just a moment. There was a flicker of gratitude in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by the cold determination of a leader ready for battle. She knew what was coming, and so did he. As they made their way back to the village, the air seemed to grow heavier, thick with anticipation. The Asari were gathered in the central clearing, their faces solemn but resolute. They had known this day would come, had been preparing for it for generations, and now it was time to face the inevitable. Zyara stepped forward, her voice rising above the murmurs of the crowd. "The Oregons are coming. We have no choice but to fight. This is our home, our land. We are the guardians of the forest, and we will not let them take it." The Asari nodded, their glowing eyes filled with a fierce determination. Ethan could feel the energy of the forest rising around them, like a living, breathing entity ready to defend itself. The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly, and the trees rustled as though alive with anticipation. Zyara lifted her arms, and the air around her began to shimmer with energy. The life force of the forest flowed through her, gathering in intensity as she prepared to face the organs. Ethan could feel the power crackling in the air, a force unlike anything he had ever experienced. But just as the village braced for the coming battle, a low, guttural sound echoed through the trees. It was a sound unlike anything Ethan had heard before, deep and resonant, filled with hunger and malice. The organs had arrived. From the shadows of the forest, the creatures emerged, hundreds of them. They were larger than the scouts, their forms more solid and terrifying. Their bodies were twisted and black, their red eyes glowing with malevolent energy. They moved with terrifying speed, their jagged limbs slicing through the air as they advanced toward the village. Zyara stepped forward, her eyes glowing with the green light of the forest's power. She raised her arms, and the ground beneath the organs erupted with life. Vines and roots shot up from the earth, wrapping around the creature's legs and arms, pulling them down. The organs roared in fury, their jagged limbs cutting through the vines, but Zyara's control over the forest was strong. For every vine they severed, more grew, tightening their hold. But the organs were relentless. They pressed forward, their numbers overwhelming, and for every creature Zyara and the Asari took down, more seemed to appear from the shadows. Ethan fought alongside them, his plasma pistol firing in quick, precise bursts. The energy from the weapon seared through the organs, momentarily halting their advance, but he knew it wasn't enough. The creatures were too many, too powerful. As the battle raged on, Ethan's heart pounded with desperation. They were being pushed back, the organs closing in on the village. Zyara was doing everything she could to hold them off, but even she was beginning to falter. The strain of controlling the forest's energy was taking its toll on her, and Ethan could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the tremble in her hands. And then, in a moment of clarity, Ethan knew what had to be done. "Zyara," he shouted over the din of the battle, rushing to her side. "We have to take the fight to them. If we stay here, they'll overwhelm us." Zyara glanced at him, her eyes wide with realization. He was right. The organs were too powerful to be held off by defense alone. They had to strike at the heart of the threat, the source of the organs' power. The core of the forest, Zayara whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaos. That's where they're drawing their strength. If we can reach it. Ethan nodded, understanding immediately. Then let's go. With a final burst of energy, Zayara summoned the last of the forest's strength to hold the organs at bay, creating a narrow path through the chaos. Together, she and Ethan sprinted through the forest, dodging the remaining creatures as they made their way toward the core of the land, the heart of the forest, where the life force of the Asari was strongest. The journey was perilous, the organs closing in on them with every step, but they moved with determination, fueled by the knowledge that this was their only chance. Finally, they reached at the core of the forest. It was a massive, pulsating tree, its roots glowing with the vibrant green energy that flowed through the land. The organs were there, feeding on its power, their jagged limbs tearing into the tree's life force. Zayara's face hardened with resolve. This ends now. With a cry of defiance, she thrust her arms forward, and the energy of the forest surged through her, amplified by the core's power. The ground shook, and the air crackled with electricity as the forest itself rose against the organs. Roots and vines exploded from the earth, wrapping around the creatures, crushing them with the full force of the land's wrath. The organs screamed, their forms flickering and dissolving as the forest's energy overwhelmed them. One by one they fell, their bodies disintegrating into ash and shadow until nothing remained. And then, it was over. The forest was still. The organs were gone. Ethan stood beside Zayara, his chest heaving with exhaustion, his heart pounding in his chest. They had done it. The organs had been defeated. The village was safe. Zayara turned to him, her eyes still glowing faintly with the life force of the forest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with both relief and gratitude. Ethan smiled, his hand gently brushing her arm. "We did it together." Zayara nodded, her expression softening. There was something unspoken between them, a bond that had been forged in the heat of battle, a connection that went beyond words. As they made their way back to the village, the dawn began to break over the horizon, casting the forest in a warm, golden light. The villagers, weary but victorious, greeted them with quiet reverence, their eyes filled with awe at what Zayara and Ethan had accomplished. The danger had passed, but the memory of the battle would remain. The forest, once again, was at peace. And as Ethan stood beside Zayara, watching the sun rise over the trees, he knew that this place, this world, was now his home. The cultural divide that had once seemed insurmountable was gone, replaced by a deeper understanding, a shared purpose. The Asari had accepted him, and in Zayara's eyes he saw something more, a future filled with possibility. Together they would protect the forest, not just from the organs but from any threat that might come. It was a new beginning for the village, for the forest, and for Ethan and Zayara. And as the light of the new day bathed the land in warmth, Ethan felt, for the first time, that he had found where he truly belonged. The end.